Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Shinobi Legions. This totally isn't the sixth take of me saying that because 4 times I've said Shinobi Legends, which if memory serves was a Naruto browser game, and that's weird because I'm not a Naruto fan, so how would I know that? Either way, in the last part we started off the game and got through a solid 3 stages, and now we're reaching some of my least favorite levels in the game. Level 4 here isn't too bad, it's mostly the next level I'm talking about in that regard. Though level 4 does have its annoyances, this stage is very trap-reliant compared to other stages, which is more so, here's the level design, it's pretty straightforward, and here's the enemies to make it more annoying. Level 4 is one of the few that's outright super trap-heavy, namely spears jutting out of ceilings, and platforms rising up and down that can also act as crushers. With that said, there's a couple things that can at least help you with that. First off, the platforms, you can actually cut them down by attacking their ropes and just wall jump up from there. And thankfully, the spears come down at such a rate that as long as you aren't rushing ahead, you shouldn't run into them too often. Though what is annoying is this upcoming mini-boss of sorts, this blue guy. He's got a lot of range. The only way that's easy to take him out is to just kind of sneak onto his hitbox and down stab him. After that, get away in case he does a fire breath attack, otherwise go for another attack. And he's also sometimes invincible. There are, I think, 2 or 3 of these guys in this level, and they just serve as annoyance, really. They act sort of as checkpoints, but not really. You can't progress in the level until you take them out, which is a bit odd compared to how the rest of the game is structured, but, oh well, I guess Shinobi 3 had the samurai mini-bosses, so this can have these. Though it's in this level where the first, if you're looking for everything, required use of the roll technique I just did comes into play. You do that, I believe, by, I forget if it's holding up and then doing a half circle forward or holding forward and then a quarter circle down. Either way, some Street Fighter input, and you roll forward. It gets you about 2 or 3 body widths away, which is pretty good for that. But its biggest use, honestly, to me, casually, is just avoiding spears in tiny hallways like this, or moving slightly faster through them, should the case be. Very often, in terms of dodging actual attacks, either the guard will do enough, you're going to be able to not guard it anyway, or you could do something I think I've done on footage, but I didn't talk about. You can actually physically attack certain projectiles to return them back to the enemy, especially enemy shurikens. The timing is a little bit awkward and tight, but it's one of those things that once you get used to it, it's super easy to do, and it does about as much damage as the Sword Strike or your own shurikens could do, so there's no reason not to, really. Although, if anything, like I mentioned last part, I probably could be using my own shurikens more. After all, I have 100 of them. Albeit, shurikens in this game aren't the easiest to find. I say as I almost immediately find, I think, a Ep.2 right there. By and large, the amount you get per stage is much lower than the main games, but it's also like they're meant to more so be the alternative option for attacking rather than melee, which the game is very focused around, I feel, in terms of its structure. Although, playing as many of these games through in a row as I have makes me realize that the further we've gotten into the series, the more important melee attacks have gotten, so to speak. Because in the first Shinobi, they were by and large just, hey, here's a different attack animation for when you're closer to an enemy. It was cool. But as we've progressed, and as shurikens became limited in use because they started being, ammunition rather than your main attack, I feel the series has rewarded being melee-focused more and more the further we've gotten. This game and Shinobi 3 probably being the peaks of that, but in Revenge of the Shinobi, it's also super useful. And I can't help but wonder if that was intentional because you're supposed to be stealthing around and all that anyway, but I don't know. It feels weird. Either way, where I'm going right now in the level is where the Bishamon sword is. It is the most out-of-the-way power-up in the game, I feel. So while we're doing that, while yes, we saw the whole intro cutscene last part that's strangely not in the FMVs for the US version, at least, if you just let the game sit. The game does, as usual, have a storyline in the manual, and it at least gives us some background on the characters that we are not going to be able to get otherwise. Let's see. The way of the ninja is to become the shadow leading the world to peace and justice. The bloodline of the Shinobi existed in darkness since the Sengoku period. Tessai, who had secretly inherited this bloodline, created the ultimate martial art form Nindo by merging ninjutsu the art of invisibility, and Ki, the art of natural power. One night, Tessai finds infant twins. Though he already had a daughter named Aya, he decides to raise the twins because he lacked sons who succeed the bloodline of the Shinobi. He named the older brother Kazuma because he possessed a loud cry with keen senses, and the younger one Sho because he always smiled while being carried. You ever see a sentence like that and realize that made more sense in Japanese? 15 years have passed, and Kazuma and Sho have learned Tojutsu, the art of swordsmanship, Taijutsu, the art of physical combat, and Ninjutsu, the art of invisibility. Aya has learned Shinjutsu, the way of peace. Tessai saw that Kazuma possessed a dangerous side which lay deep within him, and his fears became a reality when Kazuma sought strength, rejecting trainings of the way of peace. As time passed, Sho and Aya continued their training and slowly acquired the essence of Nindo. Tessai eventually passes away without naming a successor and handing down the final mystery. Consumed with hatred and the desire for supreme power, Kazuma now leads Garzo, a group of evil in darkness. Sho stands as an obstacle, however, and Kazuma has abducted their sister Aya to drain her powers and keep Sho from interfering. Sho must now rescue his sister while crushing his brother's plans for domination in the ultimate fight for survival. Now, I've played this game through a couple of times at this point, but I'll be real, that's not the exact implications I always got from the story. Mind you, when I first played, I thought Sho was supposed to be more so like Joe Musashi's like son or grandson. Kind of doing a cyber shinobi, but better in every way, really. Either way, we're on to the boss fight, which is this guy with fire. Now, the boss fight himself, as far as I'm aware, is completely invincible. Instead, we need to pull a tennis with Ganon, so to speak, and reflect his projectiles back at him to damage him. The hitbox is pretty forgiving on how big the projectile is versus your strike, so you don't need to worry too much. With that said, things you do need to worry about: whenever he teleports, get off whatever platform you're on because he's about to light it on fire. And watch out for the bottomless pit below you because as you slowly approach that, you are ever so slowly getting closer to death. Later on in the fight, he will summon a shadow clone of sorts, who I believe will fire a second projectile you can also reflect back at the main boss. But to be frank, usually when that happens at that point, I know he's close enough to dying, I can just use the Thunder Dragon technique and take out the rest of his health in one due sweep. Not a very hard boss, but if you're very paranoid about bottomless pits, it can be tense. With that said, time for probably not the longest cutscene in the game, but like one of the 3 longest. They had to flex that CD storage somehow, I suppose.
カズマは何を企んでいる。
この世を邪悪なきで閉ざし、そこに君臨しようと。
そのために最終奥義を。
人道最終奥義を会得できるのはこの世に2人だけ。人道継承者である翔かカズマ。今闇の力に打ち勝てるのは翔、あなたしかいないわ。
しかし最終奥義の教えは師匠からは何も。
一人ではダメなの。男と女の気が合一しなければ。
気の合一？
最終奥義の秘伝は父から密かに授かりました。
師匠から。
男子に宿る力の気、その乱れを収め無垢な力に還元すること、それが気の合一に至る心の術。合一した気は宇宙とその波動を共にし、無限大のエネルギーを生み出す。ショー！これはまだ初めの一歩。達人にかかると山をも簡単に消せるというわ。
師匠が隠していた意味が分かるような気がする。話は一部始終聞かせてもらった。この女はもらっていくぞ。
Okay, time for what's, if not my least favorite stage, my second least favorite stage in the game. Stage 5 is really annoying for one major reason. The first, no, actually not even the first half, more or less the entire main stage is comprised of an auto-scroller, which isn't too bad in and of itself. Problem is, we're on a tiny minecart the entire time while ninjas fall from all around us to try and do damage to us. What makes this annoying is largely three factors. One, and most prominently, it's very easy to take damage on a limited platform like this. Two, the carts themselves move slowly. And three, there are occasionally points when you make jumps from one cart to another in order to avoid falling into a bottomless pit. They do warn you, like in Shinobi 3's auto-moving stages like the horse and jet ski, that there's a jump like that coming, like this. But still, something you need to keep in mind is that I believe, like, Sonic 4 Episode 1 and Quackshot's minecart sections, to make an odd reference, you need to make sure you're holding in the direction that you're about to jump, otherwise the momentum's not going to carry you far enough. But there is, thankfully, one other bit of mercy in the game, technically two, in that this game takes a bit of a note from some of the prior Shinobi games in that there are no active touch damage instances outside of certain boss attacks that are just a charge forward. In order to take damage in this game, you need to actively either touch a projectile or an enemy's attack hitbox, like a strike of a staff or a throwing forward of a weird little scythe thing, things of that nature. Additionally, unlike even some prior Shinobi games, there isn't much active knockback, not that this series was particularly well known for it anyway. In this game, if you get hit, that happens. What we just saw what happens, really. Yeah, you just go, ow, what the hell? In a movement similar to what the, I think, Rebirth mode was what it was called in the PS1 remake of Castlevania 1. That also happens in midair, but unlike Castlevania 1 on PlayStation, the jumps in this game control well enough that if you get hit in midair, you still are able to control yourself. Also, one other minor annoyance, sometimes there are stalactites hanging down above you, and if they're too low, you will actively just kind of face plant into them and get pushed off the cart. Another good way to avoid not dying here, or to avoid dying here, rather, avoid not dying means you die, duck a lot as well. Honestly, ducking and guarding is probably your best defense from any cheap hits of a new enemy spawning in, as that means you're a smaller hitbox and that at least one side of you is guarded. The guard's a little bit weird in this game in that it's not just where the sword is that gets blocked. It kind of goes about halfway into your character's sprite. You can block attacks that are right on top of you sometimes, but if they're a bit too far to one side, you might still take the hit. Which, you know, I'm at least thankful the game's that forgiving in a lot of ways. In terms of what you can do, this game is just an easier Shinobi 3 with some more clunk to it, so to speak. And in a way, I prefer it for that, but I think Shinobi 3 is definitely the more fun game to play. With that said, though, we're now on to my least favorite boss fight in the game, in that it's not a boss fight. You know that joke that people like to make that every beat-em-up game's gonna have an elevator section? Well, like the Statue of Liberty stage in Shadow Dancer on Genesis, and that one section of the final stage in Shinobi 3, we have an elevator section filled with nothing but about the same 2 or 3 varieties of ninjas. This is slow, this is tedious. I would rather have had an original boss fight I could be done with in about a minute and a half, rather than a tedious section like this that takes, if I'm recalling correctly from the original footage, is close to 4 or 5 minutes long? It's, yeah, no, this is bad. This is just straight up bad. I don't know why they did this as at least a boss fight section. I guess I wouldn't have minded this if this was maybe half as long and led into an actual boss fight. But no, once we reach back where we were at the top of the elevator shaft, we're done with the level. Kind of awkward feeling compared to the rest of the game's pacing, but, I mean, it's one of the few actual blemishes, but I feel how this game is paced action-wise, so I guess at least there's that. The game usually is pretty filled to the brim, at least, with action platforming at such a rate that it feels like a natural Shinobi game, even if it is in some ways a step backwards from Shinobi 3. But yeah, that's stage 5. That elevator section and that minecart section I don't like, but I think what my least favorite level in the game is still slightly worse.
Shou, もはやお前に勝ち目はない。最終奥義はもう俺の手の内だからな。
Insert Dr. Evil musical cue here, because that's supposed to be a dramatic reveal, I guess. Either way, with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 3, more stages. See you guys then.